almost all the people who I knew doing anti-apartheid campaigning are still, whatever it is they're involved in now, the work, or if they're still involved in politics and campaigning, pretty much stayed the course. I don't know anybody who's just like, oh yeah, I did that in my 20s, but now, I just make a fortune and I don't care about the world anymore. Not necessarily staying campaigning on the same field, but are all still playing a part and still trying to make the world a better place one way or another, which is a nice thing to have. There is quite a lot of continuity.
It was important that we were able to continue the work. ACTSA was started off as a similar organisation to the anti-apartheid movement, but has changed over the years. And inevitably, ACTSA has become a lot smaller because a lot of people did think job done. And a lot of people over the years have, while they were part of the anti-apartheid movement, stayed involved with ACTSA. They are now a lot older, people like me, and beginning, now what we need to do is to think about what's relevant for younger people in the context of what's happening in the region. It was set up in order to do precisely what I said, combat the legacies of apartheid and of colonialism, and to continue to act as a point of solidarity for people who are now, beginning to take over their own country. Very exciting for them, but also very difficult time, extremely difficult.
We drew from that resistance and that determination and self-determination, self-organisation, because it's important that those who are on the receiving end of the discrimination are at the forefront of the struggle. And that included actually the wider movement challenging if it was too white, there wasn't a presence of people who were directly impacted. And, that includes people of colour, black people, but it also includes disabled people, women, LGBT plus people, other groups, younger people, older people, all of those groups who were disproportionately impacted need a voice and a seat at the table. And it shouldn't be people talking about us, and there should be nothing about us without us. That's what we believe.
While ACTSA still exists and the AAM continue to be committed as a solidarity group, it's gone through many changes because we've had to continue to be a bit nimble about what's needed in the region. There's no point of existing just for the sake of being there, and that would be wrong. So we do have to question ourselves every few years. Are we still relevant? Are we still needed? Is there a call for us? Is solidarity the right way forward? And I think for all the answers have always been yes, you're still needed, continue to do the work. So we continue to do so, and it's a more tricky organisation because where's the one thing that we can campaign against? It just isn't that. There's no more apartheid, but what there is enormous injustice, continued issues about loss of opportunity.
Representation, on one hand, is important. So, of course, our visibility and having a seat at the table is important. But if we're not there representing for our communities, we're not making a difference for our communities, and we're endorsing the status quo or making things worse, then we're not really there. Just saying, oh, we've got this amount of black people in our cabinet, for example, is not equality. That doesn't achieve equality. And actually what we need is equity. We need a level playing field. We need systemic racism to end. We need the legacies of enslavement and colonialism to be addressed. We need an equal footing in every aspect of life, whether that's education, whether that's the labour market, whether it's about everyday racism as well. So we shouldn't have to walk out of our door and actually think about how we're going to protect ourselves from racism, but that's our lived experience. So those people sitting on the cabinet, they're not representing me, they're not representing my community because they're not standing up for our rights, they're not speaking out on the issues that affect us. In fact, they're endorsing policies and ideas that actually work against us and don't achieve equality.
Climate justice now has become a big issue, but it always was in that region, because land has been exploited in a way that's led to huge consequences, land and water and resources, huge consequences just on climate change, let alone resource looting, which has been going on and still is to a large extent in that region. So our links are very clear. We have, UK has been built on a legacy of slavery, colonialism, globally, but we focus on Southern Africa. It has been built on that. And we have a responsibility in this country to ensure that we support the countries in Southern Africa to overcome those legacies. And that's not easy. And it's nuanced and it's difficult. And it's a hard message to give across to people.
I think it's a reminder that if we're silent and we do nothing, that something as horrific as apartheid can even happen in the first place. And the more we're silent, the more we empower those who want to oppress us to do that. So we have to always speak out and we always have to resist. But when times are hard and things get difficult and you think this is really challenging or this is really hard to take on, or you start to get burned out, reminding myself of the struggles people went through in South Africa, of the resistance, of the strength and determination in such horrific circumstances, and that so many people lost their lives in that struggle and in standing up. I'm always reminded that we stand on the shoulders that those who came before us. If they didn't fight, we wouldn't have lots of the rights. Whilst we're fighting, to retain those rights, lots of the things we take for granted, we wouldn't have them if it wasn't for people standing up for their rights. And actually what the anti-apartheid movement, what happened in terms of the resistance of black and brown people in South Africa, that empowered black and brown people both in the UK and in the USA to think, well, if they can stand up to apartheid, we certainly can stand up to the racism we're facing here. And so, yes, I keep that with me and remind myself of that all the time.
It was the people of the region, and in South Africa in particular, who overthrew apartheid. And it was through the fact that they made the country ungovernable. It became too difficult. But I will say that we played a part. And our part was to do with ensuring that South Africa knew that its time was up. It was going to be too difficult to trade. Their whole idea of themselves as a nation had been destroyed. Apartheid was announced by the UN to be a crime against humanity. We were asking for boycotts, which were successful. So banks had disinvested, people were not buying South African goods, people were campaigning when sports teams came over, so in fact they stopped coming over. People stopped going over to South Africa. The cultural boycott included a large number of artists and musicians who refused to go. Fantastic, good for them. A few broke the boycott, but most didn't. And that could do nothing but lend support to the inability for the apartheid government to see how they could continue. It just wasn't going to be possible. Whether it was that year or next, things were going to have, they would have to stop. So I think the pressure that we put nationally, internationally, because these boycotts were all over the world, but I think Britain was pretty much important in the international struggle. The other thing I would say is that the number of people involved, I think the anti-apartheid movement was one of the largest social and political groupings that's ever been per capita in a country, and I think the other one was probably CND. But when you think about the large numbers of people involved, it was huge, and it gives some idea about how when people get together and have a desire to make a change and work together from very different backgrounds and abilities, they can make a change. It's possible. So we changed the nature of our country's relationship with South Africa. And that was a big deal. Yeah.
It is quite easy for people to ignore how much our wealth here still depends on those unequal relationships with the rest of the world. How much of that is about solidarity type work like ACTSA is doing, focused on Southern Africa, in the same way that the groups with sort of Latin America or Palestine or in the Middle East more generally. But I think again, that can seem to be just about not charity, but solidarity with suffering groups over there rather than us looking at ourselves here. And I think Anti-Apartheid did a pretty good job of making people do that. But I think, we probably do need to, do things that keep illustrating that.
We established BARACUK in 2010 because we knew that cuts that were being proposed were going to have devastating impacts and not just on the workplace. So whilst I'd already been campaigning around cuts that were impacting on my own union members, I knew that we needed a wider campaign. So I co-founded BARACUK as an anti-austerity organisation focused on people of colour. We use the term black in its broadest political sense. But actually, very soon after we were established, we realised that hand in hand with the effects of austerity came deepening racism and deepening injustice for our communities. So the remit of BARAC broadened.
An awful lot of racism that comes out sometimes more openly than other, but also a sort of that just the unspoken assumptions and ways of thinking is definitely still there. But I think things have moved, and I think that is partly because of things like anti-apartheid movement, as well as later things like the Stop the War movement. Again, I think had a huge impact on the way people in Britain think, and what Britain's role in the world is.
Freedom for me would be waking up in the morning and not having to think about navigating discrimination. And you talked about intersectionality earlier, and as a black disabled woman, I experienced different levels of barriers, underrepresentation and discrimination, during a day, a week, a month of my life. So having a level playing field, not having to walk into a room and think about how people are going to react to you, having faith and trust in the fact that if I've got the skills and talent to do something, go for something, I'm going to be treated on merit rather than judged by who I am. That would give me freedom. But one of the driving forces for my activism was when I gave birth to my son. Wanting a better future for the next generation was one of the reasons I've kept on fighting. But actually, the next generation are facing a horrific future and worse things, actually, on lots of different levels than I faced, even though I grew up in a time of, really bad gender and race discrimination. So that saddens me. So the idea that future generations would not have to spend their life fighting discrimination, that would be freedom.
Yeah, I'm doing something that might help change the world. It's quite intoxicating when you just feel you're a little part of it, but you do matter. And I think if you don't do that, the world's quite frightening and you can feel quite powerless. So it's definitely going out there, organising, feeling, just, having the conversations, making a little bit of difference. Yeah, really. It definitely is the part of my life I look back on as the most sense of achievement and felt, there's a vibrancy about it, which is probably partly just about being in your 20s, But yeah, I've got an awful lot to be grateful for what it gave to me. But also, yeah, it is lovely to look back with pride at what you did and how you did it. You can always feel it wasn't enough, but I think that will always be the case. We could have done more, we could have done things better, but I think we did all right.